Hi guys, welcome to another video from Little Too Simple. We all know Michael Jackson as the king of pop and an extremely successful musician and artist, but very few people know that despite all his success and even after earning billions of dollars during his extremely successful career, he actually died with hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. So let's try to find out how and why the king of pop died in debt. And if you like this kind of video, then please subscribe to our channel and feel free to like and share this video with your friends. The most important clarification: it is extremely important to understand that Michael Jackson was definitely not a poor guy. He was an extremely rich guy, and his story is a typical case of asset rich and cash poor. He was a billionaire in terms of his net assets, but he suffered with cash flow issues throughout his adult life. He basically spent more money than he was making, and that resulted in the accumulation of a huge amount of debt. His actual finances are extremely complicated, and this video is an attempt to explain the story of his finances in the simplest possible way. Michael Jackson had three main sources of income: his music albums, his tours, and his business investments. As we all know, Michael Jackson made the majority of his early fortune through his music albums. But the problem with this source of income was that the majority of the revenue from his music albums came mostly right after the launch of the albums, and the recurring revenue from these albums was not huge and was in the range of $5 to $7 million per year. All in all, by the time of his death, Michael Jackson made over $1 billion in income from his albums. When it comes to revenue, his tours were very similar to his albums. The tours were a good source of one-time income, but they didn't provide any recurring income. By the time of his death, Michael Jackson earned over $200 million from his tours. His business investments were his primary source of recurring income. One of his most well-known business investments was his purchase of rights to the entire Beatles catalog, and he made a recurring revenue of $10 to $20 million every year since he purchased it in the late 90s. Overall, Michael Jackson was making a revenue of $15 to $20 million per year during the last 10 years of his life. $15 to $20 million in income per year might sound like a very good amount for most people, but due to his ultra-lavish lifestyle and his other commitments and obligations, Michael Jackson was almost always short on money and relied heavily on borrowing. Michael Jackson's spending can be broadly categorized into three things: living expenses, mortgage payments and maintenance costs of his properties, and legal costs. Everyone has living expenses, so it should not be a wonder that even the king of pop had living expenses. But his lifestyle was extravagant even for someone with so much wealth. He always stayed in ultra-luxury hotels which cost tens of thousands of dollars per night. Despite owning the almost 20-acre Neverland Ranch, he stayed in a lot of hotels and rental properties. In fact, he was staying in one of his other properties at the time of his death. Some of the best examples of his extravagant spending include his collection of suits worth tens of thousands of dollars, most of which he wore only once, along with his collection of vintage cars and art, and the exorbitant rents he paid for the properties he rented. In fact, at one point he held the record as the highest rent payer in Manhattan. All in all, his living expenses alone amounted to around $3 to $5 million a year. But his biggest monthly expenditure was his payments towards mortgage and maintenance costs of his properties. Along with his most well-known Neverland Ranch, Michael Jackson also purchased several residential properties across the United States, and some of them were very expensive properties. Along with the initial cost of purchasing the properties, Michael Jackson spent exorbitant amounts of money on renovation. He spent over $20 million on renovating Neverland alone over the years. In fact, Neverland was so big that just the maintenance costs of that property alone were upwards of $5 million per year. In total, Michael Jackson spent close to $10 to $15 million per year on mortgage payments and maintenance of his properties. None of his other expenditures even come close to the amount of money he spent on legal expenditures. He had been through at least 2 sexual harassment lawsuits where the settlement amount was over $20 million per suit. Other than this, he was the subject of several other lawsuits that were settled for unknown amounts, along with a divorce settlement with his wife. It is estimated that Michael Jackson paid upwards of $60 million in his lawsuit settlement amounts alone over the years. Add to this the costs of hiring the best and most expensive legal staff. Even until this point, things could have been in control for the king of pop, as all this spending discussed so far could be easily managed from his income. But things took a drastic turn when he paid for his legal settlements through very high interest loans, as he obviously did not have enough money to pay for the one-time legal settlements, which were much more than his annual income. And he also did not cut any costs when it came to his lifestyle, even at the time of his huge legal settlements. These high-interest loans are where Michael Jackson's finances started going downhill. Year after year, he started taking more and more loans to pay interest on the previous loans, and his overall debts kept on increasing. At the time of his death, he had unpaid loans of around $500 million, and the annual interests on these loans alone were over $20 million per year. After this, his other expenses of $10 to $15 million per year meant that by the end, he was making around $15 to $20 million per year, but had commitments for $30 to $35 million per year, and he made up for this difference through more and more high-interest loans. Michael Jackson is the best example to prove the fact that saving and investing money is more important than making money. He made a lot of money, but due to a mix of buying more than what he could afford and several other wrong financial decisions, he died in debt. But lucky for his family and children, all his assets, which include all his properties and music rights, amounted to over $1 billion at the time of his death, and his unpaid debts were around $500 million. Thus, even after all his debts were settled, his family and children were left with around $500 million of wealth. Hence, it can be said Michael Jackson died asset rich but cash poor. Let us know your views on this topic in the comments below. And if you found this video to be interesting, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one. Until next time, have a good one, guys.